In other news, the New South Institute is releasing a new report investigating how the process of appointing senior officials to positions in government could be improved. The sort of suggestion is that, for the moment, the most important reason for a person to be appointed is political. It's about how politicians making the appointments feel about them. It's about cadre deployment. As I understand it, this report is about trying to improve that process. Ivor Chipkin is the Director of Government and is a Director at the New South Institute. Ivor, good afternoon to you. What exactly are you trying to examine here? What are you looking at?
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. So this report comes in the wake of quite a big initiative, I think quite an important breakthrough actually. We have to give credit where credit is due, which comes out of this administration. So several weeks ago, I think it is now, Cabinet approved a framework document on professionalising the public service. So this is a document that appeared largely out of the blue in 2021, December 2021, suddenly this framework document appears. And it puts firmly on the table, on the policy table, two principles which people like myself have been fighting about for a long, long time now, battling and making a noise out, writing about, advocating in favor of, giving evidence as to why we need to do these sorts of things around public sector reform, public service reform, around two major principles. One, we need a public service which is appointed more on the basis of merit than on political criteria. And secondly, we need a public service where public servants are insulated from inappropriate political interference from politicians. So if you like, establishing an autonomous and professional administration as at the heart of South African government. And my own work suggests that many of the things that have gone wrong in South Africa over the last 15 years in particular relates to the growing politicization of the public service and the weakening of key institutions. So this report really is an attempt to assist that framework document. So what the framework document does, it puts firmly on the table this idea of meritocratic recruitment of the public service, and this idea that we need to pay much more attention to how public servants are recruited, especially in key state institutions. So what we've done, Michelle Leroux, I'm sure many of your listeners and watchers are familiar with. Michelle Leroux is one of South Africa's leading advocates. Myself and a colleague of mine from the New South Institute, Raphael Leiter. What we've done is, with regard to key state institutions, we've gone through all the legislation regarding the provisions as to the appointment of senior officials. What does the legislation say a senior official needs to have in order to qualify for a position? And we've gone through all the Chapter 9 institutions, in the law and order environment, police, intelligence, and in the financial environments. There is some difference, but largely the pattern is astonishing, I think. You'd be, or perhaps you won't be surprised. So nothing seems to surprise us in South Africa anymore. But what is not in any of the legislation is requirements that specify particular qualifications that are required, particular levels of experience that are required, particular personality traits or professional orientation. None of that is in any of the legislation. Instead, the legislation often requires merely a person to be appointed. Often it just defines the process. The president may appoint somebody. Who that person is, what qualifications they have, what experience they have, is left completely open. And I'll give an example. The Commissioner of Police, for example, is appointed by the President, accountable to the Minister of Police. It creates all sorts of strange tensions around to whom is the Commissioner of Police accountable. But as you may or may not know, there are no requirements as to who the Commissioner of Police should be, what minimum standards of education, of experience, nothing. It's the same for instance.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I mean, how important are qualifications? Because, I mean, do I need to remind you that Desmond Royne was the most qualified finance minister we've ever had? It's about more than qualifications, isn't it?
Well, it's about experience as well, and this is where there's been some interesting developments in our courts. So what we're saying is the legislation is too open-ended. So what's happened recently, and this goes to some way to answer your question, the Constitutional Court has to some extent stepped in this regard. And again, it's not the role of the courts, I don't think, to be defining the criteria for the appointment of public servants. But so severe is the situation that I think the Constitutional Court has been forced into this domain. And it's trying to do there's the Glenister case, which is a very famous case, of course, launched by Francis Anthony when he was head of the Switzerland Foundation, and in that capacity, I think Francis has done some very important work in South Africa. So what the public services, what the Constitutional Court has done is it's tried to give expression to this notion of fit and proper. In some of the legislation, it says that in order to be appointed to those positions, you need to be fit and proper. But what does fit and proper mean? So in some cases, it means you need to have a minimum qualification. But for the point that you've just made, qualification in and of its own right is neither here nor there. I mean, the first Commissioner of South and Revenue Services, for example, was Pravin Gordon. You know, his experience in tax matters was non-existent. He was an activist. He was a pharmacist by training. By those sorts of standards, setting a minimum qualification on tax would have disqualified him. So, in and of itself, qualification is not so significant. Experience is an important one. Having been in that role and having experience in the role. But the Constitutional Court says something very interesting. It begins to develop this idea that fit and proper refers to people that are able to advance the purpose or the mandate of the department to which they're appointed. In other words, not just...
I'm so sorry, we are going to have to leave it there, but it's an important point, and I know this issue is going to develop very much over the next little while as we head to those elections. Ivor Chipkin's the director at the New South Institute.